Okay, let's set the scene. We're talking about the end of China's Han Dynasty. It's absolute chaos, a time of brutal civil war, larger-than-life heroes, and some of the most brilliant strategic minds in history. But in an age that was all about the strength of your army, one man's intellect was the most powerful weapon on the battlefield.
You see, behind the most feared warlord of the era, Cao Cao, there was this almost shadowy figure, his advisor, Guo Jia. They called him the ghostly genius, a strategist so ridiculously sharp that his predictions felt less like analysis and more like, well, magic.
And you know what? Cao Cao knew it right from the jump. The moment they met, he saw that Guo Jia wasn't just another smart guy. Nope, this was the key. The one person who could help him take a completely fractured China and piece it all back together.
So who exactly was this ghostly genius? And what made him so critical to Cao Cao's plans? Let's break it down, kind of like a masterclass in strategy, and see how this one man's mind literally shaped the course of a dynasty. While from a super young age, Guo Jia's perception was just on another level. He actually joined up with Yuan Shao for a bit, who at the time was the big dog, the most powerful warlord in the north. But Guo Jia bounced almost immediately. Why? Because he saw a fatal flaw that absolutely everyone else missed.
And it all comes down to this contrast. Guo Jia looked at Yuan Shao and saw a guy who was great at making plans, but absolutely terrible at making a decision. He was a leader who got lost in all the pomp and circumstance and couldn't actually use the talented people around him. And in Cao Cao, he saw the exact opposite, a decisive, no-nonsense leader who cared about results, not appearances. That single judgment call led him straight to Cao Cao, and boom, history was made.
All right, this brings us to their greatest test, the Battle of Guandu. And look, this wasn't just some battle. For Cao Cao, this was do or die. Losing here meant total, complete annihilation.
I mean, the situation was just hopeless. Yuan Shao's army was massive, outnumbering Cao Cao's forces by maybe 10-1. Cao Cao's men were literally starving. His top advisors were starting to crack, and some were even sending secret messages to the other side because they were so sure it was over.
So here it is, the million-dollar question. How on earth do you win that fight? A straight-up battle would be suicide. All the normal military playbooks, completely useless here. So what do?
Guo Jia's answer was, well, completely unconventional. He didn't come up with some complex battle formation. Nope, he offered a psychological takedown. He laid out his famous 10 victories, 10 defeats theory, which basically argued that numbers don't win wars, people do.
So here's the genius of it. Guo Jia just completely reframed the whole war. He argued that Cao Cao was the better leader point by point. He said Cao Cao had the moral high ground, was a way more effective ruler, and was a much sharper strategist. He zeroed in on Yuan Shao's big weaknesses, his indecisiveness, his jealousy, his love of complicated rules, and basically said, these are the things that are going to make him lose.
And this just shows you the incredible power of psychology in a war. This wasn't just a pep talk. Guo Jia's analysis completely flipped the script. He restored the army's shattered morale and convinced them that winning wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. He proved that the first battlefield you gotta conquer is the one inside your own head.
But Guo Jia's genius went way beyond just pumping up the troops. The guy had this almost spooky ability to predict what was going to happen, just by understanding the personalities of his enemies. Let's look at a couple of wild examples. So while Cao Cao is completely bogged down at Guandu, all his advisors start freaking out about a possible attack from the south, from this warlord Sun Ce, a total beast on the battlefield. Everyone is panicking, except Guo Jia. He just calmly predicts that Sun Ce, as amazing a warrior as he is reckless and doesn't watch his back. He'll be taken out by an assassin, and soon. Okay, fast forward. Yuan Shao is defeated and dead. Cao Cao's generals are all like, let's go, attack his sons now while they're weak. And again, Guo Jia gives this totally backwards advice. Do nothing. He argued that if Cao Cao attacked, the brothers would team up against him. But if you just leave them alone, their own greed and jealousy will make them tear each other to shreds.
And guess what? He was right. On both counts. It was uncanny. Sun Ce gets assassinated, exactly like Guo Jia said, and Yuan Shao's sons? They immediately start a bitter civil war, destroying their own armies and letting Cao Cao just walk in and clean up the mess. That was Guo Jia's signature move, winning entire campaigns without even having to fight.
This leads us to his final and maybe his most audacious strategic masterpiece, a super high-stakes campaign way up into the barren north to finish off the last of Yuan's supporters and their allies.
You can just imagine the reaction in Cao Cao's camp. Every single one of his other advisors was screaming, "No!" They said the journey was too long, the army was exhausted, and it would leave their home base wide open for an attack. By any traditional military thinking, it was a completely insane idea.
But Guo Jia, as usual, saw it completely differently. He argued that the enemy's biggest advantage, how remote they were, was actually their biggest weakness. It made them cocky, overconfident. He said the key wasn't strength, it was speed. A big, slow army would get spotted a mile away. The only chance they had was to do the unthinkable, ditch their heavy supplies, and launch a lightning-fast surprise attack.
And Cao Cao rolled the dice. He went with Guo Jia's insane plan. He led a small force on this brutal, fast march, and it worked. The enemy was caught completely off guard and totally crushed. With that one brilliant, reckless campaign, Cao Cao secured his entire northern border and finally unified all of northern China.
But this incredible triumph, it would be his last. On that harsh journey back from the north, Guo Jia's health, which was never great to begin with, just gave out.
He died at the shockingly young age of 38. 38! The mind behind Cao Cao's greatest victories was gone, right when his lord was on the verge of conquering everything.
Years later, Cao Cao suffered the biggest, most crushing defeat of his entire life at the Battle of Red Cliffs. It was the loss that destroyed his dream of a unified China, and in that moment of despair, he reportedly wept and said these famous words, convinced that if his ghostly genius, Guo Jia, had been there, it never would have happened.
And that right there is the heart of Guo Jia's legacy. He's remembered not just for the incredible wins he engineered, but for the massive, devastating hole his early death left behind, a hole that you could argue completely changed the course of Chinese history.
And so we're left with one of history's greatest what-ifs. If he had lived, with that uncanny insight into both strategy and human nature, could Guo Jia have navigated the Battle of Red Cliffs and delivered a unified China? We'll never know for sure, but it's one heck of a question to think about.